Hello everyone and welcome back to Final Sector. I'm Michael, that's Kyle. As always, we're talking about the Miami race. We're going to break it down. Reminder, if you haven't already and you're watching on YouTube, remember to subscribe. Feel free to give us a like, it does help us out a lot. And comment your thoughts on the race. If you're on Spotify, remember to follow us. You'll see us in your feed. And you'll get our podcast, which is coming out next week. You'll get it a few days early as well. So remember to do that. But we'll get straight into it because there's a few things to talk about. First point that I've got is that Ferrari boss qualifying, but Red Bull strong where it matters, which is it's a recurring theme. It's starting to become a recurring theme.
We've kind of got our first little trend going here. We've had a few races, a bit of up and forth, back and forth, and now we're kind of okay. We're seeing a few things, storylines form here.
If Ferrari 1 and 2 in qualifying, Sainz had a much better weekend than he has had previously, which is awesome for him. The one thing I thought was strange, I didn't want to touch on it this early, but I'm going to.
Okay.
The predictions that we did, I think I've talked about this with you. I talked about how I thought Red Bull will be faster through the high-speed section, and then Ferrari would be better through sort of the low-speed section. It kind of didn't work. It was almost like the other way around. That first sector, which is a lot of high-speed corners, Ferrari were very, very fast through it, and then Red Bull were very fast in Sector 2 and 3. And Sector 2 is where they had that really fiddly slow section. Granted, they had the straights. I think this race is a really good example of just how strong that Red Bull power unit is as well. So, but it just seemed to go against what we've seen from the season so far, where it's Red Bull in the high speed, Ferrari in the low speed, but it almost seemed like it was the other way around, and that fucked with my predictions, and I'm really mad.
I know. Or even if it wasn't the other way around, like they almost seemed like equal in kind of the middle speed. There wasn't like that almost ebbing and flowing like we saw at somewhere like Jeddah, right? Or Imola, there was an accordion almost, and here it was kind of like they were equal through the slow stuff, and then the straight Red Bull was like, see ya.
Boy.
So it was interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of people were saying as well that it wasn't even just on the whole of the straight, but it just seems like as they kind of get towards the top end, kind of the Ferrari will kind of hit its top, and the Red Bull will suddenly just unlock like an extra little boost. It's like it's a button. It's just like boom, and we saw. We even saw that on the overtake on Charles. They were kind of closing, and then it got near the end, and Max just suddenly went, yo! It was like, oh.
Goodbye.
Yeah. So, and interesting as well, considering if we started on practice, that I didn't watch too much of the practice, but I saw some of the main themes and storylines about how Max actually had a pretty rocky practice, and it was all over the place. They had a gearbox issue, and we saw from, Melbourne that we think that car's quite hard to set up, and yet it showed that even though they went through all this turbulence, they seemed to get it in the sweet spot for the race. Again, as we'll probably talk about, they seemed better on the tyres, they seemed happier overall. Still some concerns about reliability we'll also go into, but luckily it didn't affect them too bad here. They still got a W, so well, hey. Interesting. It seems like they had that very rocky start. I mean, despite the fact they've seemed so dominant in the last few races, they're still behind in the championship. But I think Ferrari a little bit going, oh, maybe we gotta ramp up maybe our game plan a bit here, because Red Bull is still like, we've got tons to go, baby. We're not even happy yet.
I wonder if Ferrari got a bit complacent and like got caught napping a little bit, and Red Bull have just come out the last couple of races and shown, okay, actually no, we are here to fight and we are strong. And we do have the best car. And at the moment, it seems like they have the best car. Which 2 races ago, I would have been like, nah, Ferrari, easily the best car.
Everyone has Ferrari won already? Yeah, probably.
But we said it. That's what we thought.
Everyone was saying it.
Like I said, Ferrari got 1-2 in qualifying. Verstappen got a really, really good launch off the start and got past Sainz into the first corner, I think. It was really,
around
really
the
good.
outside of the first corner. Great move.
It was very, very good. Sainz didn't even get that bad a start, but that was really important for Verstappen's race. He could not be stuck behind Sainz.
The only
for any
thing
length of time.
Sainz really could have done was try to go like on the inside of his teammate, but he wasn't going to do that. So he kind of had to tuck up inside. And they were saying a few drivers at the start, if we're going to talk about the start, they said that Alonso, for example, was saying that during the parade lap, he actually saw that there was a tremendous amount more grip on the outside tighter on the inside, and he knew that
Yeah.
you wanted to be out there. So Alonso too, similar to Verstappen, realized that. So they both were like, oh, outside, that's actually the side you should be covering, because then you get that run into the next section easy peasy. So critical for Max to challenge early, and that set him up beautifully to challenge for the lead very early.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, they were pretty close. I mean, they sort of went. We'll get into that. It gets a bit later into the race, but the safety car definitely brought things together.
Yes.
Yeah. My second point, before we go into sort of that sort of thing, I wanted to touch on a couple of other things first. But my second point that I had is that Mercedes somehow stay within touching distance of the top two teams. And they get a 5 and 6, again, P5, P6, somehow. Despite their car being as... No one can really argue at this point that car is not super good, and the fact that they're still the third best team is kind of mind-blowing. Like, the results that they are able to pull out of their ass at the moment is astounding. At George's race in particular, the strategy worked perfectly for him. He started...
I was going to say, yet again, he predicted out the safety car.
Yeah. He started way back and then ended up finishing ahead of... he didn't even make it into Q3 and still managed to finish ahead of Hamilton in the end. So, fantastic race for him. But yeah, that Mercedes are doing just enough that if they can... I think I said this last race as well. If they do manage to get a hang of their issues with the porpoising, which, to be honest, there wasn't a huge amount of it this week.
There wasn't a huge amount, but they said that everyone was able to run high here anyway.
Because everyone was running low drag, so...
Yeah, so everyone was able... That's why you didn't really see any cars at all porpoising. Was less because they fixed it, and more you didn't really need it. And that's what they were interesting, saying how apparently Spain it'll be the opposite, where everyone wants to run really low. So people are saying, well, Mercedes here, I mean, they did apparently bring some minor upgrades, and they have kind of a few they're amending now. They're still in the background, Toto's kind of saying we're still trying to get a hold of what's going on here, which sounds like they still are quite a while away from deciding, are we actually able to do something with this, or do we need to go back to the old version, version 1, right, and commit to...
Well, that was the interesting thing, is that they mentioned on comms as well, I think it might have been Martin Brundle who pointed out that the really perplexing thing is Russell, people were getting sort of hyped or excited for Mercedes because they started popping up in practice like top of the times. George got the best time in FP2 at 1:29.9, I think it was. And he went a second slower in qualifying.
Yes.
And no one can really work out why.
Yes.
It's so odd. Like, I don't get it. That car obviously just seems to be so... Either they were trying so many different setups, and the setup they eventually landed on was just not as good as the one they had in FP2, or that car is just so tricky to get in the right zone or the right window. I don't know what it is, but obviously that car's not where they want it to be.
No.
But it still can be quick, as George showed. Like...
It seems to be like a car that does have underlying, like, decent pace, but it's almost like the Red Bull thing where it seems like it's really hard to set up, and they have to, like, almost go all guts out just to get to a point where it's the third best car, let alone think about anything better. And then we saw from when they don't get it right, you go look at Hamilton and Imola, right? That's when they don't get the setup right, when he's stuck at the back and can't do anything. And they did attribute that to George, saying he found a great setup and they just couldn't find it with Hamilton's car. So it seems like they're just really having to try really hard to get it in the gold spot, but that gold spot's no longer the top step. It's occasionally sneaking onto the third step if they're lucky, right? Otherwise, it's just third best team fighting with the other midfielders that are kind of there too.
I guess it's worth keeping an eye on them. Like I said, if they can get a hold of their issues, they have a fast car. They're still getting enough points at the moment. They're salvaging enough points to stay within touching distance of the top two teams. They might be able to spring something back half of the season. We'll see what happens. We'll see what comes. I know we said in our preview that there's a chance they were testing a lot of the stuff in Miami. So if they found a direction to go in, then maybe they can get something sooner rather than later. But definitely one to keep an eye on. They've definitely gotten probably the best result possible for this one, taking P5, P6. So
considering both Red Bulls, both Ferraris finished with limited to no accidents or anything, that's all they can hope for.
Exactly. Yep. My third point that I had, again, we'll move on to the fun stuff in a bit, but I just wanted to point out Bottas continues midfield dominance despite late error on old tyres. He was running P5. He was actually running
So
ahead
speaking of Mercedes,
yes, running ahead of both Mercedes.
He was like, hello.
Yeah, he got a little bit caught out. He didn't, with the VSC, again, we'll go into more detail a bit later, but he was on like 20, 30 lap old hard
He was
tires,
one of the ones that didn't choose to,
Yeah, so I think he would have benefited a little bit more with Hamilton and Russell's kind of fighting behind them a bit more, but yeah, I think he was still very good to come away with the P7. He seems to be absolutely on it in that Alfa Romeo. Has he got points in like every race so far? I can't remember, but if it's not all of them, it's pretty much all of them.
Yes.
And he seems to be like a genuine contender for like top of that midfield. In that Alfa Romeo, he's showing what that Alfa Romeo car has. It's insane considering how us and many other people predicted that car to be at the start of the season.
It's going to be a good look back at the end of the year.
Anyway, but I guess speaking of the midfield, Mick and Vettel both ran in the points close to the end before they came together, and Papa Vettel was not happy, so Mick managed to finish. I think they got him in, and
he did, because he still finished ahead of Magnussen.
Well,
which is ironic considering the story so far this year has been we've seen Magnussen kind of boss it, and we've gone, oh, that's good, but then Mick's kind of struggled here, and yet this weekend, I guess I talk about it before the incident. So this weekend up to the incident, you still say that he pretty much did boss it. There didn't seem to be too much with Magnussen that he was struggling with. It just Mick seemed to actually find his sweet spot, and there's been a lot of work from inside. He's had a lot of pressure to just try and get his first points right, to just get that over the line and get it done. He has to stop thinking about it. And he was overall fighting well. He was battling well. He was keeping it fairly on track. About the move in general, I've been looking up a lot about it, and I think that a lot of people agree it's one of those moves where in maybe like 80% of circumstances, it was a good move, right? Like, I don't see too many people that really, I could say, I know what they're talking about to say that he shouldn't have gone for it, right? That's why the stewards didn't really, they looked at it briefly and they said, no, it's fine. I think it came off because he was coming out of the last corner, and I think he went wide a bit, and Vettel snuck through, but then he kind of caught himself up and was trying to get it back off him straight away before he potentially falls back. Because I think Mick was more defending from Vettel and someone else, I don't remember who, behind him, right? But if you see the move, it's actually, most people would say it's a good move, and in about 80% of circumstances it works out, but I think it was one of those circumstances where Vettel just doesn't think to check the inside, because he's probably come off the previous corner because he thinks that Mick's gone out wide. He's just thinking, okay, now I'm ahead, I've just got to push and make sure he can't catch up, without checking, and therefore he goes for the move. If you actually look from his onboard, it actually looks like a pretty decent move, but then Vettel just goes, I have no idea you're there, boop, crash, both of them spin out, right? And as you say, it had to be those two, and you'd hear them both on the radio going, like they just wanted to, almost not say anything, and you heard the commentary saying, this is why it's hard to be friends, because these things start happening, and you just, but I almost felt bad for him, because again, it was almost a rotten way to top off a good weekend, but I wouldn't say it was a really dumb error. And, yes, he kind of went wide in that final corner, but then how many people went wide? We just talked about Bottas, who made that mistake as well. We saw, I think, Gasly do it earlier. We saw a lot of drivers kind of go out there, and we saw that it was actually really hard to not kind of skid out onto the wall. You really had to slow it down. So even then, if that move had worked out, it would have been even more credit to him to go, whoa, he's truly, proved that he's here and he's actually got something in. It's almost just really unlucky it didn't work out, but the point I'm saying is I wouldn't take that away from his performance. I think it was a decent move he tried to make. It was just right towards the end of the race. All the drivers looked exhausted afterwards, so it was probably a bit of, as we say, just Vettel kind of just trying to focus on one thing and not seeing. So unfortunate for both parties. Hey, for Vettel as well, running in the points, considering, remember, his start in Australia and how abysmal that was, and yet he had a pretty solid race here in the points, so it's unfortunate for both of them to put their flag down in the midfield. It's like,
I guess we'll talk about the rest of the point scorers as well.
Yes,
Albon somehow sneaks that dog shit Williams into the points
benefits
as well.
Yes, 10 over the line, P9 actually after a penalty.
Yes,
so
and then I think Stroll ends up P10 as well.
Yes, because
I don't
of the
know
penalty.
how that happened. And Ocon managed to get up to P8 from the back of the grid as well.
From the back of the grid. And to its credit, both of the Astons started from the pit lane as well. We didn't even mention that.
Yes,
they stuffed around with their fuel.
Yeah.
Apparently, They when their fuel was too cold, so they couldn't put it in. They had to let it naturally heat up, and they had to start in the pit lane. And both of them were then up there in the points, and Stroll did get that point as well. But to his credit, and Ocon, both starting basically around the back. Kudos to them. In a track where we didn't see that much overtaking, the whole matter was there wasn't that much passing, and yet they still made their way through. So
yeah. Actually, we'll get onto that. Now that we've seen the track in action, do we think the track is good?
I think it's one of those races where it's hard to tell in the perfect example I give is the first year we went to Baku, right? Baku was the first race was pretty damn boring and rotten and nothing happened. And since then, almost every year it's been a cracker.
Been great,
and I wouldn't say this is going to be a Baku, but you could tell it was a bit safe overall. It was really when we got that safety car restart, I think everyone then gained a bit of confidence that we actually saw that you could make some moves and some passing and all that. So I think it's hard to judge. I think it's ironic considering that, they hype this up to be the event of the year and everything before it and after it and all that. And in contrast, it looks a bit silly. Yep. But then they've always done that with Monaco, I guess. So that's nothing new, right? Yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm curious what you think as well about it.
Well, I think I still maintain what I've said previously. Is I think the track itself is good. I think it provides a really good balance and a good challenge. Like, it's a tricky track.
Very good challenge. Very tricky for the drivers.
And there's at least opportunities for overtaking. It's not like Monaco where it's like there's if you want to overtake, you have to like Formula E or go-kart, like bunts your way through style kind of thing. Like there's enough track. Yeah, exactly. Push to pass. Yeah. So there's enough track and there's enough areas of the track where you can overtake.
And you can really hound a driver too. We saw a lot of that even through that fast end of Sector 1 left-hander. There was a lot of guys being pressured and they went wide, and so
I think the abrasiveness of the track actually kind of helped as well, because you saw more of those errors about going sort of that slightly wide, that really long sort of slow left-hander. It was just kind of creepy. You'll just creep wide. You just keep going.
As soon as you're off, then you're just in the marbles and the crap, and you got to sneak back on and try and get it off. It's not just like, I've gone a bit wide, but I'm in front, so it's fine.
Yeah.
I'm back.
The other side of it is that they were saying that offline because there was so little grip, the overtakes were hard to do, because to overtake you have to go offline effectively. And then you have less grip. So unless you have like a considerable amount of grip, even from the restart we saw, there were drivers from 0 lap old or 1 lap old mediums compared to like 30 lap old hards, and they couldn't make overtakes by the end of the race.
It wasn't like they were flying through like you would expect.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like, I think the basis of a really good race is there, and I think the track itself is surprisingly very, very good. I think if they can make a few little tweaks, I don't know how they'd be able to do it, but if they can make it so,
you'd even think that maybe some of the slight tweaks they want to make just to the cars or the tires might help as well here, right? Is that general philosophy they're trying to help would probably help here anyway.
For sure.
But certainly I wouldn't put the race and the track as a whole in my my bottom tracks. Let's get rid of them. It was
good.
As I say, it was unique and it was different. It was ironic, I guess, before we move on. Just again touching on the midfield, the reason some of those guys lucked out was Alonso. I don't know if you caught why Alonso was penalized at the end of the race. I actually heard the story of it today, and it's quite interesting.
Leaving the track and gaining an advantage, was it?
Yes.
That's all I know about it. Yeah.
So that's how they labeled it. So it was a few laps to go. He was being chased by Mick, and he was chasing someone, I cannot remember who, just chasing a driver. And through that zigzaggy small chicane, I believe it was, he accidentally kind of cut it, right? Yep. And as he cut it, basically he went over the sector beam for Sector 3, and his sector came up in purple. And at the time, everyone was like, how's Alonso gone purple in Sector 2? It's because he basically straight-lined the chicane and gained a ton of speed. However, after he did that, he actually put his hand up and he slowed down a bit, recognizing he gained an advantage. To the point where he really only gained, I think it was like a tenth on it wasn't a tenth. It was like a tenth or something or like half a tenth on Mick or something. Like the gap was basically reduced to the point where it was almost negligible that what he'd gained.
Yeah.
But I think at that point, the question I saw people raising is saying it seemed a bit harsh that they then said, "Oh yeah, like
So that's
he got
what they
the
gave the
purple
penalty.
Yes, so he got it because they didn't, and he
Really?
gained a lasting advantage because he cut it, and there still was an advantage, even though he did purposefully acknowledge it and tried to slow up. It's just that he probably didn't slow up enough. So that's actually why he got that slap on the wrist, and that's how Stroll finished in the points by, it was some tiny amount. I think it was literally like a tenth or 2/10 he snuck into that 5-second virtual race. Yeah. So I thought that was interesting. Go online and read up about it if you want. It was kind of missed because there was so much. I knew that was going to happen when the race was ending. You saw like a car going off here and overtaking there, and even when the race ended and they were on the radio with the winner, I still saw like positions being played. I'm like, I don't want to see them talking to Max at the race. There's a battle going on out there. There was like still cars moving, and they're like, hey, good job, Max. I'm like, I don't care. Get him off. We know he's won.
Let's move on to the big event, because the race sort of, it was petering out to very Monaco-esque fashion, where it was just kind of everyone's sitting behind one another, nothing really happening,
or everyone's a few seconds apart. They're either in a train or they're kind of just idling about.
Exactly.
One stop.
And then it ended up being I'm surprised because like pretty much all the predictions were like it's going to be a 2-stop. It's going to be like medium hard or medium hard or something like that, or medium hard medium, and it's like
that soft was shit.
It was not good. I think it was going off like at the end of
even people that were stopping there with 8 laps were like, yeah, I'm putting a medium on. It's like, okay.
No chance. So then the race sort of got exciting with the VSC, which turned into a safety car. Then let's talk about the Norris-Gasly incident, because there's been a bit of discussion on this one.
Bizarre little thing, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very odd. So Gasly got caught out at that sort of really, again, long left-handed that we talk about, where you just sort of go wide, just couldn't slow it down. It looked like slow motion as he was trying to get into the corner. It's like, it looks like he was crawling around the corner. Turns out he couldn't steer.
Yes.
So he went way wide. I think he let 1 or 2 cars through at that stage.
2 cars, I think, were through, yeah.
He's on the radio basically saying, I can't steer. And as he's coming through, Norris has come, and they've just collected each other. And had to bring out the VSC and eventually the safety car, because it's just debris all over the track. But before we talk about how that affected the race, what's your thoughts on the incident itself? Because it was a bit of a weird one. Because at first I would have been like, I thought it was probably Gasly's fault, but the fact that he couldn't steer, Norris apologized as well on the radio. He was like, I'm sorry. He didn't he wasn't straight on the radio being like,
why'd he turn left on me?
Right, and go left. And, Gasly didn't, Gasly was on the radio. You can actually hear the radio message where he's like talking about how he can't steer. And then as you hear the crunch, he's like, oh.
It's like, oh.
Yeah, it's like, so maybe he wasn't looking in his mirrors. Is it just both were a bit clumsy, or like, how do you see it?
I think you kind of summed it up. I think I don't know if they were necessarily clumsy. I think it just was a kind of tricky-ish situation, and that part of the track in particular was quite thin as well.
True.
And maybe Norris couldn't really gauge his kind of the speed he was closing, and maybe he thought he was going right, or maybe Gasly was slightly going left. Again, I don't know how, if at that point he couldn't actually steer at all, the car was just veering. It didn't really look like he was veering left, but I guess he was slightly moving over. And I think Norris made a comment that he kind of would have had to have really hugged the wall, but then when you saw it from the outside, you're like, I guess a little bit. I think it was just one of those incidents where there's a bit of kind of 2 drivers trying to, as you say, Gasly's trying to probably be on the radio figuring out, can I reset this? Is there a button? Is there trying to keep it straight and just to the side-ish. Well, Norris is probably coming out. I mean, he was running near the back from those 3, so he's probably quite frustrated and all that, and he just sees it, and he's probably going, go through, and I don't know,
Yeah.
And then he goes, boot, and then you see his tire go, whee!
Yep, yeah, I don't know.
Yes.
It was very, very weird. I don't even know what to think of it, but I had someone from work bring it up, and apparently he was...
Oh, really?
He was talking about how I think he went out with friends or something, and they would have this big argument about whose fault it was, and I'm just like, Uh, I mean, I think they deemed it a racing incident as well. Like
they didn't even really look.
Required.
Yeah, they did a little bit, but again,
both of them went out. Yeah, so it's kind of null and void. But yeah, very strange one. But what it led to was very interesting. Because at this point of the race, there were quite a few drivers, as we've alluded to already. Quite a few drivers started on the hards, looking to run long. George Russell was one of them. I believe Ocon. I think both the Aston Martins were also on the hards. I think Ricciardo might have been, but he pitted earlier, so he sort of missed out on the strategy. But a lot of these drivers were still on their first set of tyres, so that VSC and safety car coming out was beautiful for them. I think even Perez on. But he had a second stop. But he had a free stop, didn't he? Yeah.
Yes, that was going to say. So there was, some drivers out there had a free stop, or they were only going to marginally lose a position to someone who was on old tyres. So some of them went for it for that reason too. And there was talk of why a lot more people didn't do it. That's why, well, as we saw, Hamilton was on the radio going, "Why didn't we stop? And why am I always unlucky?
Why is it always me? Because you've had 7 years of good luck with this shit, man. Let some other people have it." Anyway.
That certainly did spice it up, as you said. And we've known how spicy this midfield is. I guess we saw, what we didn't really touch on was we saw Checo stop, and he was essentially then in fourth, and he'd been kind of with Sainz for most of the race. He'd been dealing with some sort of power problem due to a sensor that was kind of affecting him. There was like one lap, he dropped about 4 or 5 seconds. It seemed to be the word I heard that from that safety car restart point, it was fixed, and he should have had full power. And I think that's partly because maybe just due to frustration from his part, maybe trying to overdrive the car, recovering from that, and partly because, as we said, this gap between the old hards and the low mediums actually wasn't that great. He didn't end up actually getting to do much with that. It still lit a good fire for the fight in the front, in that it then closed up Verstappen and Leclerc, and they actually kind of stuck to each other for a while, so there was something to follow each lap. And it was almost a shame that was happening, because there was so much happening behind them. Again, if you watch that timing tower, there was like, and then your yellow flag went out, you saw a name go, doo, and then another one went out, you saw a name go, doo. And it was like, I want to see that. I get Leclerc's not going to make the move. We know the Red Bull's a rocket.
Exactly. Yeah. I think we both commented how we wanted to see that Russell Hamilton as well, because that was going back and forth a little bit as well. Obviously, Russell.
I still don't know what happened there, because Russell made a move and then he went off and he kind of half gave the place back. And then we saw a few laps later that he then made a move again, and we were like, "How is he making another move? He already made
he already
it."
Did
like,
it.
What the hell's happening?
It was very. It's the one time that the cameras haven't been on Hamilton for 75% of the race, and it's the one time we really should have been. Yeah,
so
damn
true.
Shame. But definitely spiced up the race. I think it was about 10-15 laps to go.
It's about 10,
So, and like you said, very, very close running with Max and Charles out in front. Max still managing to hold out with that OP Red Bull engine to take the win.
Charles made, was it during that when, it was either that or previous when Charles made a little mistake too, I think, similar on that really long left-hander. He went a bit wide and he lost 2 or 3 seconds. I couldn't remember when it was, but again,
could have been then.
That,
yeah. He was pushing mighty hard for a few laps there. He looked like he was going faster than he did previously in the race.
Yes,
like he'd
saved it all up, all the juice.
But
and to their credit, and again, that's more showing on Max and Charles really were like as good as Checo and Sainz are doing as number twos. They were still miles off the pace of the front too. And that restart was just, again, we were just like, the 2 of them are gonna do it again.
It's turning into one of those. It's turning into the Max Lewis again, isn't it? Like they're just so much faster. I don't know if you could put like anyone else in that car and they would come as close. I just don't. Yes. I don't know right now. I think they're just both in the zone right now. So here's hoping it goes till the end of the season. I'm very much hoping. I know they like we said in the preview, Ferrari did say they saved a lot of their upgrades for after Miami. Like a lot of their big upgrades were coming for after Miami. Miami, I do think, will suit Barcelona. Again, like I said, it's not quite as high speedy as Miami is, so there's a very good chance they could come back for that. We'll talk about that in the Spain preview. But I'll move on to my final point, which is kind of more a discussion point. We've touched on pieces of it, but are Red Bull and Verstappen favorites again? Has it swung?
I don't want to have this conversation.
Well, it's one of my points. So give me a yes or a no. There's no grey. This is a definite
if it's
answer.
yes or no, then yes. You've got to say yes. It's not like this is just the first. If you asked me after, well, even if you asked me after Imola, I'd be like, oh boy, that's really hard to say. But this is really continuation of that form. Like favorites, yes, but I think it's pretty marginal overall, you know. I think it's almost like I feel like there's almost gonna be like 3 phases to the season where we have this intro phase where Ferrari blasts out of the blocks and they get a bit complacent, and Red Bull start a bit rocky, but then they kind of figure it out. And as we said again, although Checo finished, he did have some smutterings with the engine, which is lucky that nothing more came from that, considering it wasn't that long ago when it was living hell for reliability for them, right?
Wasn't great.
Yep. So I feel like this first phase is almost the exploratory phase, and I think the second phase will almost be like each of them going, okay, here's actually our full hands, right? Let's get down and dirty. Let's put both of our upgrades on, show everything we've got. And then I'm hoping that will be quite equal to an exciting end of year, right? Where it's kind of like you've had that big battle. This is a great season. And, you know, we're starting to reflect on it. We're starting to go, is this, you know, Max versus Lewis again? Is it Charles first or is it Max second and continuous, right? Maybe the Mercedes is up there now. They're also mixing things up a bit, as we've seen, you know, Red Bull sometimes do in the past.
Can we have some Abu Dhabi drama again?
Exactly, yeah.
That'd be great.
So I'm hoping it kind of flows like that. I still feel as, again, we're in this almost exploratory period, and there'll be almost a break, whether it's because it's a 2-week break between races, where then there'll be a bit of a
swing. Yeah.
They can go back and kind of go, okay, let's make sure we've got our full hand ready so we can then throw it going forward. So that's my hope anyway.
Well, the thing is, I know there was a comment I saw. I didn't read all of it. I sort of saw it briefly, but Ferrari were talking about how, I don't know who it was from Ferrari, but they're saying they're not sure how Red Bull can keep up this level of development until the end of the season, given the cost cap. Like the upgrades and stuff, the upgrade plan that they have, they're like, I don't know how they can keep doing this until the end of the season. So my thinking is like, I wonder if Red Bull are throwing like a huge amount early and being like, okay, we're going to throw our full hand now. And Ferrari are playing sort of a patient game and sort of rolling them out. You know, they've kind of got their plan where they're rolling them out over the course of the year. Is there a chance where, you know, you get to the last 3 or 4 races, Red Bull have no more money for upgrades, like they can't afford it because
just exhausted everything.
Yeah, exhausted all of their resources for it, and Ferrari can just be like, okay, no, we've got this and we've got this, and and they can just sort of if they can stay kind of even with Red Bull and consistent, and then just sort of leap ahead towards the end of the year. We saw Ferrari do that against McLaren last year. You know, they sort of were the 4th best team, and then they're just like, whoop, okay, no, we're the 3rd best team, and that happened in like 6 races. Like, they were easily 4th best, and then they were easily 3rd best. So, in the last quarter of the season, so it's. I'm very curious to see whether or not the teams will sort of run out of those resources by the end of the year, as Ferrari are maybe suggesting. But, we'll see. I think Barcelona is going to be in regards to the question I asked of you, are Red Bull and Verstappen favorites? I'm going to reserve judgment until Barcelona, because that is one that I do think it's a track that literally everyone knows. They go there every year. They do testing, obviously. And Ferrari were super, super strong there in testing. I imagine the track is suited to Ferrari as well. If Red Bull are on Ferrari's pace or stronger than Ferrari's pace at Barcelona, I can see them being favourites for the rest of the year. But
I would say with that initial trend that we gave each kind of the teams and their strengths and weaknesses, that you would say it's a Ferrari favourite. But if we're thinking Red Bull's unlock something extra in those slower mid-speed corners, you'd think that actually here, if they're equal, and that's almost a sign of going, maybe they have caught up a bit on that aspect they were weak on. I guess the only point I was going to add to what you said was, although it is still like this is the first proper kind of cost cap year rather than being a partial year, or more so like last year was more cost cap for the future rather than current year. We still didn't make a lot of comments at the end of last year about how Red Bull compared to Mercedes really felt like they threw every thumb and nail at it to get over there at the end. And yet at the start of this year, we've seen them start not only near the front, but then also seemingly catch up, despite being slightly behind from Ferrari, while Mercedes that were, our comments and their comments seem to be the end of last year, having a bit in their pocket and having a bit of savings because they hadn't had to go as hard. We've seen where they've started this year, So I guess the only comment is maybe Red Bull are just really good at managing their resources in a cost cap, considering they had to fight so bloody hard at the end of last year, and they've come in so strong with a brand new car this year, and it seems like they had a bit of a gap that they had. So, again, there's a comment to say, well, actually, hold on, how the bloody hell are they doing that? That's just theoretically impossible. I don't know enough to say that. If that's some of the moments coming from inside, then maybe I'd, add more faith to it. But that's the only comment I would give, is they seem to have some sort of track record there. Well, Ferrari, as you say, last year were kind of wrote it off anyway, despite the fact again, Ferrari seemed to improve last year quite well as the year went on, and yet every comment they were making was, oh no, we're focusing on 2022, we're not focusing on this year. Oh, by the way, we're taking chunks out of our rivals every weekend, but we're focusing on next year. So it's almost like... Again, it's almost like the trend for both teams last year, where Ferrari seemed to kind of just do these big chunks that were so consistent, while Red Bull was more just when they needed to, really rapidly pushed it out, right? It seemed to chuck everything in and then kind of go, okay, now we're going to sort it out because it's all out there in the open. So seeing how that philosophy goes out this year, I agree. It's going to be really interesting.
Yep, yeah, for sure. But like I said, let us know your thoughts on the race and where you think everyone stands. And
the show, if you want to. The show was we're not going to talk about it, but the show itself was very interesting.
Yeah. That's a whole other thing. Maybe we'll talk about that on the podcast.
Good idea.
Bring it up on the podcast. But yeah, I guess if you have questions for us or topics you want us to talk about, let us know either at Final Sector YT on Twitter, or you can leave them in the comments of the YouTube video. We'll be answering questions, and we might discuss some topics that you want us to talk about if we think they're relevant as well. So let us know. But until next race is Barcelona. We've got 2 weeks. Like I said, we've got our podcast coming out when's this one coming out? This weekend. So podcast will be coming out on Spotify on Sunday this weekend, and then a few days later for YouTube. So stay tuned for that one. But yeah, enjoy the week, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the race, and we'll see you for the next video. Take care.
Ciao.